Chapter 12. A Secluded Solstice. The library was completely silent, save for the soft crackling of wood in the fireplace, the intermittent turning of a page, and the impatient tapping of a foot. Kai and Saiyah were focusing during their familiar study time, but this evening they were joined by a third member. Riley was seated at the table with them, but ever since he sat down, he seemed impatient to leave. He would fidget, tap, roll his fingers, and occasionally exhale loudly. After some time, he let out a long, exacerbated sigh. Wow, he mentioned to Saiyah. You weren't kidding. Saiyah looked up from her book and gave him a curious glance. I wasn't kidding about what? When you said you both meet in the library every night to study, I assumed it was code for something. Kai raised an eyebrow as Saiyah leaned forward to scrutinize Riley under an interrogating gaze. Code for what, exactly? She asked pointedly as Riley leaned his chair back to stare at the glass ceiling in boredom. Something a hell of a lot more interesting than this, he muttered. Oh, I'm terribly sorry, Riley, Saiyah tersely replied. I forgot it was my purpose in life to entertain you. Riley rolled his eyes and began once again drumming his fingers on the table. Hey, Kai! He suddenly exclaimed in excitement. You're a traveler, aren't you? Yes, Kai replied uncertainly. Fantastic, Riley stated. Then the night is young and all of Iselia is open to us. Kai shook his head. When I talked to Arden, he requested I don't leave the grounds of the castle while he's away. What had started out as a few days' endeavor had now turned into several weeks. He had communicated to Kai through his amulet, giving him updates on the situation at Helia. The latest information he had was that Arden was tracking down any witnesses who might have seen Arden or knew where he might be headed next. Riley merely waved his hand dismissively. He'll never know we lived, he argued. Plus, I heard of this tavern on the eastern continent that serves the best pints. Also, I heard there are these, dancers? Riley, stop trying to lead us down a path of drunken debauchery and read your book, Saiyah snapped. Riley grumbled as he turned his attention back to the pages in front of him. The familiar sounds of fidgeting fell upon the group, until finally Riley shot up from his seat and proclaimed, Nope, can't do it. He then immediately turned from the table and started walking away. Where are you going? Saiyah shouted after him. To actually enjoy the remainder of the evening? But do have fun, my boring little bookworms, he replied before shutting the library doors behind him. Saiyah was left with a disapproving glare at his sudden exit. So, he's, not the studious type, I take it, Kai remarked. Whatever gave you that idea? Saiyah mumbled as Kai chuckled. Kai turned back to his studies, reaching across the table to grab another edition about magic stones from the infinite stack he had brought over. Nowadays, he was switching between trying to discover more about the creation stones and trying to find a way to stop a necromancer like Arden. Both equally important subjects. Saiyah looked up and noticed the book he grabbed. You have an interest in them, don't you? She asked as Kai looked at her questioningly. Magic stones? Saiyah clarified. I've noticed you read quite a few books on the subject. Kai halted for a moment, carefully thinking of a response. He trusted Saiyah, but he wasn't sure how much he was supposed to tell her about the creation stone. As far as he was aware, the information had been kept to High Council Maesters only, and he wasn't about to be the one responsible for letting it leak. Yeah, he replied. I heard Arden mention some ancient stones that actually held the power of the elements. They sounded interesting to me. Ah, the original creation stones. Yes, it is fascinating what they were able to craft, even when magic was still new. Sadly, they exist now only as rumors. I did hear mention of one discovered about 50 years ago or so, but that too must have been just a tale. Kai focused intently on the pages in front of him, determined not to show even the slightest tell that he knew more than what he was letting on. If you are interested in magical stones, though, there are other fascinating examples that exist outside of myth. Saiyah's hand extended forward as she pulled up the sleeve of her robe. On her right wrist was an ornately decorated charm bracelet. Gems of all colors and clarities dangled from the silver chain. You see this stone? she said, pointing to a clear gem that looked like an uncut diamond.
"It is an empathy stone. It senses the emotions of those around it. It is said to turn black when you're in the presence of those with evil intentions against you. This one," she pointed to a green emerald, "is a spiritual ward, helps prevent curses. Oh, and this one," she noted, pointing to one smooth as river rock, "is a weather stone. It will hum slightly when it's about to rain. Plus, stones such as these have their own unique aura that is unlike any other. Which means that even if you come across a sunstone, for instance, you could not use it to scry for another sunstone because their auras would be completely different, just like with people. It really is fascinating."
Kai smiled and put back down the book he had just picked up. "Well, I certainly don't need these now that I know I'm in the presence of an expert," he remarked. Saiyah blushed slightly while retaining her high-born composure.
"Hardly an expert. I simply come from a long line of mages. My great-great-grandmother collected magical stones like these for centuries. In fact, this charm bracelet is given to each new mage of the family. It has been passed down for a few millennia."
That amount of time was incalculable to Kai. The fact that each elf could live up to 1,000 years, while humans were lucky to make it to 100.
"If you would like, I could show you a fascinating book on other magical stones."
Kai grinned back at her. "I would appreciate that." Saiyah beamed at him. This was clearly a subject of great interest to her. She immediately got up from the table and disappeared into the library shelves. She returned a short while later with a large leather-bound volume. She popped it on the table in front of Kai before dragging a chair over and sitting beside him. Kai caught the faint scent of lilac and lavender. Some sort of perfume, he assumed. He was surprised he hadn't noticed it before. He found the scent rather calming, subtle, and pleasant.
"Now,"
Saiyah began, thumbing through the pages of the book,
"I suggest we start with memory stones. They are quite intriguing."
Kai walked into the tower to see Arden seated in his familiar armchair by the fire. It had only been a few weeks since he had left for Helia, but the expression on his face looked like that of a man who had aged several years. "You're back," Kai noted as he set down the books from the library on the dining table. Arden nodded and let out a long sigh. He looked beaten down, and Kai didn't want to pepper him with questions, but at the same time he was desperate for information about his home realm. "Did you find anything?" Kai questioned. "Yeah. It turns out the Council's intel was correct. Arden was responsible for the attack." Were there any survivors?" Kai asked. He already suspected he knew the answer, but still he had hope. It was quickly dashed, though, with a silent shake of Arden's head. It had been a long shot. The Council had heard there were no survivors even before Arden left. Still, it hit harder to know it was now fact and not mere conjecture. Kai let out a solemn sigh, stung with grief for his fallen kin, and struck with a reignited desire for revenge. "Were you able to catch up with Arden?" Kai inquired. He really hoped Arden had been able to take a few shots at the cold-blooded bastard. Arden shook his head again. "I got close, but I lost the trail when the fucker left the realm." "How?" Kai inquired, clearly confused. "How was he able to portal? I thought the only travel orbs in existence were in the control of the Council. Did he make his own? Is he getting help from a traveler?" Arden shrugged. "I've heard there are other ways between realms, outside of portals. I could not tell you what they are, but clearly, Arden is well versed in the subject. He's been able to slip in and out of worlds as easily as stepping in and out of a doorway." Yet another puzzle about Arden. He was a necromancer. Traveling should not be his affinity. Therefore, it made sense that if he wished to travel to and from realms, he would need help. The question was, what kind of help, and from whom? Arden let out a long, deflated sigh and fell silent, rubbing his temple. He looked tired, and even though elves didn't sleep, Kai thought he probably could use it right now. Arden had been the only one on the Council who had gone to investigate the 800 human lives lost. He had been the only one who had tried to get justice for the slaves that had been slaughtered. In truth, he seemed to be the only maester on the Council who cared. "Arden?" "Thank you," Kai said. Arden looked up in surprise. "Thanks for what?" "For going to Helia.
for investigating what happened, for trying to get justice. Thank you.
Arden's face fell a bit. I didn't catch Arden.
But you tried, and that matters. More than you know.
Arden nodded. He knew how humans were treated and was one of the few Kai had met who sought to change that.
I think I'll head to bed, Kai stated, wishing to give Arden some time alone with his thoughts. He got up from the chair to leave.
Hey, kid. Kai turned back as Arden looked toward him. He pointed toward the door to the tower. Do you want to tell me why there's a threshold spell carved into the doorway?
Shit. Honestly, the spell had completely slipped Kai's mind. Just like with Saiyah, Kai didn't want to tell Arden the truth, mainly because he didn't want Arden to think he couldn't handle himself against other mages. He had to be able to fight his own battles, and besides, Arden had enough on his mind. Kai's war with Thaden should be the furthest thing from it.
Just a precaution, Kai replied.
Precaution for what?
For the Creation Stone? In case anyone working for Arden tries to get to it. We can be alerted if anyone tries to enter the tower to obtain it.
Arden raised an eyebrow slightly. Kai was acutely aware his explanation made him sound paranoid. He wasn't able to think of a better story on the spot. Arden finally broke his interrogation-like gaze and simply shrugged.
If it helps you sleep better, then by all means. But even Arden's followers aren't crazy enough to sneak into the castle with so many maesters around. Besides, the stone isn't in the tower.
Kai was surprised by that piece of information.
I just assumed... So would a lot of other mages, which is the main reason I didn't stash it here. One thing about mages, they are so focused on secrets and hidden truth, they often can't spot the forest through the trees. You want to hide something from a mage, you do it in plain sight.
Kai paused for a moment. If Arden wasn't that concerned with followers of Arden breaking into Caelum Vallis, then it sounded like he was concerned some were already here.
Arden, responded Kai after a few moments of silence.
Do you think other maesters on the council are working with Arden?
Arden's face grew serious. I hope not, Arden finally replied. But let's just say there were a few too many supporters of Umbri for me to take that chance.
Arden's expression seemed to darken for a moment. Kai wondered if he had broached a topic he shouldn't have. There was a tense silence in the tower as Arden stared at the fireplace, his face unreadable. Kai figured Arden was probably just tired. He decided he should leave him in peace. Well, I'll head to bed. Good night, Arden.
Good night, kid, Arden muttered back, never breaking focus with the flames. Kai awoke one morning several weeks later to a muted sun streaming through his bedroom window and a swift chill wafting over his face. He pulled the blankets up toward him and groaned a bit. He assumed the fire in his room had died. As Kai reluctantly shuffled across the cold wood floor to add a few more logs to the fireplace, a flash of white caught his eyes. He turned toward his window and saw something falling from the sky. The closer he got, he realized it looked like small tufts of cotton were raining down. Peering out at the landscape, he saw a blanket of white. Snow. He had heard of it, seen pictures of it, but never witnessed it firsthand. Kai pushed open his window and felt a sharp sting of cold bite his face. He held out a hand to catch a few falling flakes in his palm, watching them melt instantly. He couldn't help but smile. He never thought he would see snow firsthand. It was an incredible sight to behold. Kai finished getting dressed and went out into the common area. A roaring fire was blazing in the fireplace, beating back the chill that was seeping through the glass veranda doors and tall windows. Arden was reading a tome in his favorite chair, sipping on tea as was his morning ritual.
Solara Anor.
Solara Anor, Arden responded, barely muttering the acknowledgement.
Since Arden had returned from Helia, his demeanor had completely changed. He no longer taught Kai spells and really spoke to him. He spent all his time head down in a book, as though entirely consumed with finding out what the creation stones were. Kai had tried to give him as much space as possible, figuring his presence was probably more of a hindrance than a help. But Kai was determined to get better at magic, to be useful to Arden, and help him in his search. To achieve that goal, Kai spent all of his time nowadays practicing spells with Saiyah and Riley. In doing so,
he found each of his friends had their strengths. Saiyah excelled in form, teaching him the correct way to stand and correct pronunciations. There was an elegance to the way she cast magic that Kai was certain he could never mimic. Riley, on the other hand, taught Kai how to fight. Riley seemed thrilled to finally know an acolyte who was interested in learning combat, which was squarely his area of expertise. As a Shift, he was incredibly fast, hit like a hammer, and could counter on a dime. He didn't rely on spells to attack, mainly focusing on melee attacks. Kai had found he was learning a lot about hand-to-hand combat. Not only that, but he had noticed his stamina and muscle strength had greatly improved from his bouts with Riley, making it that much easier to maintain spells in dueling. Ever since returning from the Between, Kai found he could now teleport without having to speak to Mora. From what he learned from the woman in white, he now knew how to cast it without having to voice the word. Granted, it only worked with teleportation. Kai suspected it was because teleporting was his affinity and easier to cast than any other spell he tried. It did make sparring with Riley more interesting, though, as Kai would teleport around the battle area, delivering an attack to Riley, then disappearing before Riley could follow up with a counter. Riley was impressed Kai was able to cast even one spell without speaking, since usually only maesters could achieve that. But as much of a help as Saiyah and Riley were, Kai wished Arden would include him in his investigation. Things between them seemed tense, and Kai was at a loss as to how to fix it. "I see it snowed," Kai mentioned, grabbing a cup of tea and trying to make conversation. Arden looked toward the veranda doors as the flakes fell and made a malcontented grunt before turning back to his book. "Not a fan, I take it," Kai added. "Of nipping wind, trudging through mounds of shredded ice, then falling on your ass in a frozen puddle? No, not particularly." "I see," Kai replied, watching the flakes fall onto the veranda through the window. "It's the first time I've ever seen snow." Arden was quiet for several moments before adding, "Well, I guess it is nice to look at if nothing else." Kai observed the landscape for several moments before he noticed there were no serving dishes on the dining table. "Did I sleep through breakfast?" he inquired. Arden shook his head. "Celeste never brought it up. I assumed she was busy preparing for the solstice." "The solstice?" "Yeah, the winter solstice," Arden explained, taking another sip of tea as he turned the page. "It is a festivity among elves, celebrating the coming of winter and the ending of the year. Vala throws a big celebration for it every year." "If it is an elven celebration, does that mean you'll be attending?" Kai asked. "The only celebration of Vala's I'll be attending will be his funeral," Arden grunted. "Noted," Kai responded. Arden turned his full attention back to his book. The strained silence fell once again over the tower. Kai figured it was probably time to make himself scarce. "I'm gonna head down to the kitchen to get some breakfast. Would you like some?" Arden shook his head, still engrossed in his book. "No thanks, I'm good." If Kai had thought Caelum Vallis was covered in silver before, it was draped over every square inch now. The great hall was filled to the brim with people holding drinks, conversing and laughing. The noise echoed through the hall as Kai weaved his way in between the groups and headed toward the kitchen. As soon as he entered the dining hall, he saw it was just as busy as the great hall. Celeste was focused on about 4 things at once, stirring sauces, chopping vegetables, and issuing orders to the various acolytes enlisted to help set up for the festivities, grabbing drinks and cutlery. Kai slowly approached the counter as Celeste shouted, "No, the bottle in the cellar! 3rd row on the right from the bottom!" to a dwarf who was carrying an array of wine bottles. She seemed flustered as she turned to see Kai standing there. "Oh, Kai!" she exclaimed. "You'll be wanting your breakfast. I'm sorry, lad. I haven't had time to bring it up." Kai shook his head. "No, it's fine. I was just—"
"Bad from the left?"
a voice shouted up from the cellar. Celeste rolled her eyes.
"From the right!"
she shouted back.
"I didn't see it."
Celeste huffed as she put the ladle down.
"Sorry, lad. Just one moment,"
she added as she headed down into the cellar, muttering the likes of,
"The daft bastard,"
in her wake. Kai glanced over at the pan of sauce she had been stirring and noticed it start to bubble and smoke. He quickly snuck behind the counter, grabbed a spoon, and continued stirring. He also grabbed the knife and continued chopping the vegetables Celeste had been cutting in between stirs. After a few minutes, he heard a small shuffle behind him as he turned to see Celeste standing there looking at him in a state of shock. "Oh," Kai said, pointing to the pan on the stove. "The sauce looked like it might have been burning. Do you need any help? I mean, I'm not a skilled chef, but I'm actually not that bad at cooking." Kai saw her face tremble as though she might just cry. He was startled by the sudden change. This was not the reaction he was trying to elicit. Did he mess something up? And here he thought he was doing something useful for a change. Kai was just about to apologize when Celeste walked up to him and put a comforting hand on his cheek. "Bless you, lad," she added with a large smile. Kai smiled back as he grabbed one of the aprons off the wall and then went back to chopping vegetables. Celeste resumed stirring the sauce and preparing trays of meat. For the next few hours, the pair worked in tandem, prepping dishes and sides and exchanging stories. Kai had to admit it was the most enjoyable cooking had ever been. Of course, he supposed that had more to do with the company than the food. The sun had just started to sink on the horizon as Saiyah walked the now empty halls of Caelum Vallis. Everyone within the castle was currently enjoying the soiree Lord Valor was holding in the High Council's auditorium. If it was anything like his previous parties, she guessed the frivolity would continue till the wee hours of the morning. Saiyah was dressed in her best violet gown, decked out in gems with her hair perfectly placed. She felt constrained and a bit like a peacock on display. She had attended Lord Valor's party at the suggestion of her maester. Lady Luelle thought the party a perfect opportunity for Saiyah to reconnect with her peers. If anything, she had spent most of the time sipping a glass of wine in her own little corner, just as ostracized as she was before. And after watching her self-indulgent peers, she felt completely happy to be so. It was strange how she once considered them her compeers and now felt out of place in their presence. Perspective, she supposed. Saiyah stopped on her way back to her room. Her final goal was to change out of this getup, but she decided to pop into the library and grab a book to occupy her for the evening. As she scanned the aisle, she was taken aback to see Kai sitting at his normal table by the fire, engrossed in a tome. "Kai," she noted with surprise, "I didn't think you would be here this evening. I thought for sure you'd be part of some celebration with Lord Arden." Saiyah awaited an answer, but Kai appeared slightly stunned. He looked at Saiyah as though he had never seen her before. "Kai?" Kai blinked a few times, seeming to fall back into the conversation. Yeah, sorry. I was giving Arden some space. He seems preoccupied after returning from Helia. Plus, he isn't much for grand celebrations." Kai gestured towards Saiyah's gown. "You seem to have come from quite the party, though." Saiyah sighed a bit. "Yes, Lady Luelle thought it would be good for me to socialize at Lord Valor's soiree. I donned this ridiculous attire and made an appearance to placate her and keep the peace. But I could not leave the event fast enough, I assure you." "Well, you look very pretty, elegant." Kai stumbled a bit as he cleared his throat. Saiyah smiled softly back. "Thank you," she replied as she took a seat at the table across from him. "So, what are you studying today?" I was just reading up on a way to deal with curses," Kai replied. "Have you heard of a transference ritual?" Saiyah sucked her teeth. "Heard of them, yes, though I don't recommend attempting one. The success rate can be spotty, possibly killing the subject inflicted with the curse, and it is particularly dangerous to the mage attempting it. Nowadays, only skilled maesters deal with the removal of curses. Still, with Arden spreading mayhem through the realms, it is useful knowledge to have. Anything helps if it can save a life." Saiyah hesitated. "I cannot argue with that logic, though I hope you never have to use it. Curses are dangerous, destroying not just the body but also the soul of those inflicted with them. To then take that curse into yourself, even for a mage, could easily kill you. While I'm inspired by your determination to save lives, I do hope it does not come at the cost of your own." Kai looked up from his book to see the worry on Saiyah's face. He was left speechless by her response. He still wasn't quite accustomed to others concerning themselves with his well-being, and was caught off guard that Saiyah was one of them. Kai wasn't sure how to respond. They sat in silence, looking at each other for several moments. Kai finally opened his mouth to answer. The library doors suddenly swung open as Riley entered in grand fashion, announcing his presence with arms wide as Kai and Saiyah snapped their heads in the direction of the sound. Friends, tonight is the night of the winter solstice, and I cannot in good conscience allow you to remain in this dreary place without celebrating the festivities of the evening. Saiyah rolled her eyes as Kai chuckled.
And what, pray tell, did you have in mind for this celebration?
Saiyah asked. Riley leaned on the table and grinned widely. I'm glad you asked, sweet Saiyah. For tonight, we shall drink and be merry. Kai was on board, but looked to Saiyah, questioning her involvement. Riley as well jiggled the bottle enticingly with a smile, as Saiyah relented.
Very well, but if so, I'm going to change first.
Arden was sitting on the veranda on a small wooden chair. He was using a footstool as a table to hold a glass of warm mead and watching the snowfall. His mind was lost in thought, and had been since his return from Helia. The weight of what had happened weighed on him heavily. Arden was so engrossed in his thoughts that he didn't hear someone enter the tower. Well, this is certainly a change. A familiar voice spoke to him. As I seem to recall, you've always hated snow. Arden turned to see Marine standing at the door of the veranda, smiling at him. He smiled back. I'm still not a fan, but I'm learning to appreciate it. He rose from his seat and turned to face her. To what do I owe this honor? I thought for sure you'd be joining Vala's celebration. Marine waved her hand dismissively. I'm not about putting on airs, and that seems to be Vala's favorite pastime. Actually, I was wondering if I might join you for a drink. Arden raised an eyebrow in surprise. Without so much as another word, he waved his hand, conjuring another seat and glass beside him. Please, Arden gestured as Marine took her seat. And just for future reference, Arden added as he poured Marine a glass of hot mead, the answer to that question is always yes. Marine chuckled as she raised her glass to Arden and took a sip. Is Kai asleep? That kid hardly ever sleeps, Arden replied as he once again took his seat. He's taken to waiting till I retire for the night, then sneaking off to study till the wee hours of the dawn. He thinks I don't know. Marine smiled. Ah, the rebellious acts of youth. If he thinks that's rebellious, I still got a lot to teach him. Ah, yes. I seem to recall your youthful antics were somewhat famous. Arden chuckled. You should. You were present for most of them. Marine straightened her stature, feigning offense. I was merely tagging along to make sure you did not injure yourself. Arden cast her a doubtful look and a small smile, uttering, Right. He turned back to the snow, taking out his pipe and lighting the end before proclaiming, But I'm guessing you didn't just come here for a walk down memory lane. Arden's guess appeared correct, as Marine quieted a bit, staring at her glass intently. I heard from the council what happened on Helia. Arden paused for a moment, before taking another long pull from his pipe. I see, he answered, focusing all his attention on the snow coming down. Marine looked at him and continued. You are certain it was Arden? I've been around long enough to know his handiwork by now. Does Kai know? Arden quieted for several moments before answering, He knows enough. He knows that the attack was from Arden, and that there were no survivors. He knows I laid the victims to rest. But he doesn't know that there were no bodies to bury, just pieces. He doesn't know that they didn't go quick, and that Arden had the help of a shifter by the tracks left behind, and that beast tore those people apart. He doesn't know that the earth started out brown, but was stained red by the time Arden was finished, and probably will be for years to come. He doesn't know, because he doesn't need to know. Kid has enough trouble sleeping. I'm not adding to that. Arden took another long drink from his mead and stared off, his face unreadable to anyone but Marine, who could see the anguish behind the mask. Why? Marine asked. Why would Arden extend such
brutality on humans. Was it retribution for the stone? Arden shrugged.
Could have been. It was quite a coincidence that we took the stone off Helia, and then Helia was attacked. For all I know, he could be sending a message. That he will keep attacking innocent towns until the stone is returned. All the more reason I need to find out why he wants the damn thing.
Marine nodded. I see. And you intend to find this information out by yourself? Without involving Kai, I take it?
Arden looked at her incredulously. Pieces, Marine, he repeated. You want me to involve him in that shit?
Were you not the one to tell him being a mage was dangerous? That it could very well cost him his life?
That doesn't mean I need to help him towards that end.
You cannot place him in a box either, Arden. Despite your best efforts, Kai is already involved. It was his home that was attacked, his people that were killed. And if Orin truly is targeting humans for some reason, it is far better he is prepared than left in the dark.
Arden sighed and rubbed his temples. Several moments of silence followed Marine's statement as Arden pondered her words. You're right. As usual, he finally replied. One of your more annoying traits, if I'm being honest.
Really? Marine replied innocently. Well, I could list off a few of yours if you would like.
Arden cast her a side-eye as Marine chuckled.
If it's any consolation, I have the utmost faith in Kai. After all, he has an excellent teacher.
Marine smiled brightly at Arden as he returned the smile. She always seemed to have the ability to brighten his mood. Marine then raised her glass to him.
Blessed winter solstice, Arden.
Arden returned the gesture.
Blessed winter solstice, Marine.
Kai was fighting off shivers as he followed Saiyah and Riley, trudging through the thick, snow-covered earth. Riley was leading them deep into the forest behind Caelum Vallis. Kai pulled his scarf tighter and placed his hands in his pockets as snowflakes brushed his cheeks. For being absolutely frigid, Kai had to admit, snow was quite peaceful. Although coming from a desert realm, he had serious doubts he would ever get used to the cold.
Riley, will we be reaching our destination before or after Kai freezes to death?
Saiyah suddenly interjected. Kai snapped his head in her direction, surprised she had noticed he was cold, considering he had not muttered a single complaint. Saiyah didn't say a word in response, just handed Kai 2 small stones about the size of his palm. The stones were warm, radiating a small amount of heat, no doubt from some spell Saiyah had cast. Just holding them helped Kai stave off the cold nipping at him. Kai locked eyes with her before returning a smile and a nod of thanks.
Just a bit further, Riley added. It's right up here.
After only a few more minutes, the group stepped into a clearing. The trees opened up to a brilliant, starry sky, interspersed with clouds dropping soft flakes of snow. Several paper lanterns were strung between the trees, softly lighting the area. 2 fallen tree trunks had been lined up around a lively campfire, with an array of crackers, cheese, and meats on a platter placed on a stump. Riley was positively beaming.
Huh?
Riley gestured, absolutely proud of his celebration. Saiyah chuckled.
Very impressive, Riley. Quite the event.
Right? Riley agreed. And to the star of the evening, of course, Riley pointed to a keg.
What is that?
Saiyah asked. 300-year-old elderberry wine, Riley proudly proclaimed.
Where did you get it?
From the storehouse.
You mean the High Council storehouse?
Saiyah exclaimed. Riley sucked his teeth. You see, I don't really like to assign labels to things.
Riley, you stole it?
Saiyah bit back. Not true. This particular wine was set aside to be enjoyed at the winter solstice. I'm merely using it for its intended purpose.
It wasn't intended to be enjoyed by us.
Well, now you're just getting into semantics.
Riley, they're going to notice a missing keg.
It's not missing. I replaced it.
With what?
Orcan brandy, Riley stated as he waved his hand dismissively. They'll never know the difference.
Oh, yes. I myself often mistake the sweet taste of elderberries with that of orcish swill water.
While Saiyah and Riley debated, Kai was preoccupied looking around the clearing. He hadn't noticed it before, but this was the same clearing Arden had sparred with him. The path seemed different now with the earth cloaked in white. Huh. Arden took me here to learn shield spells, Kai noted. Riley and Saiyah stopped their debate and turned their attention to Kai's comment. You mean Lord Arden trained you on spells personally? Riley questioned. Kai nodded as Riley and Saiyah exchanged bewildered glances. Is that unusual? Kai questioned. Well, yeah, kinda, Riley noted. Riley took a long drink from his glass of wine before handing one to Kai and Saiyah. So, maesters don't train their acolytes? Asked Kai. Not really, Riley shrugged. Why? Kai asked. Riley and Saiyah exchanged looks again. It is not to say that some maesters don't join the council for the right reasons. Some truly are interested in duty and honor, such as Lord Arden. But for others, it is mainly the title they're after. Saiyah paused before stating, My mother, for example, was the last in my family to achieve the title of maester. She served on the council just long enough to train an acolyte to replace her, which was, in fact, Lady Luelle. In her case, it wasn't duty she was interested in, but the title ensured a rather prosperous marriage to my father and a fair amount of prestige. I have always been interested in magic, so my studies are my top priority, whereas Maester Luelle might rank them slightly further down on the list after ensuring I make the right connections. Same goes with my family's priorities for me. Kai was stunned and grateful to have Arden as his teacher. I've been an acolyte to Lord Giveon for about 20 years now. He's a great card player and knows a ton about weapon work, but my magical knowledge isn't exactly his number one concern, which suits me just fine. I imagine he'll start caring more about my magical know-how when he starts thinking of stepping down from the council. You've been an acolyte for 20 years? Kai asked in surprise. Riley nodded. It's fairly common. I've been an acolyte to Maester Luelle for 30 years myself. It is said it takes 50 to 100 years of study to achieve maester status. Kai chuckled wryly. Well, that pretty much guarantees I will die a novice. I would not be so sure of that. You have shown remarkable progress in just the past year you've been here, certainly more so than Riley has in the last 20, she noted, casting an accusatory glance toward Riley. Riley merely shrugged. Becoming a maester was never really my goal when becoming an acolyte. Why did you become an acolyte? I've heard shifters don't really subscribe to magic. In truth, to get away from my family. To say I never really fit in with my clan is putting it mildly. Granted, I don't fit in here either, but for the most part, the highborns are too caught up in themselves to give a shit. Riley then pointed to Kai. But as for you, Kai, the highborns definitely give a shit about you. So I've noticed, Kai mumbled. The first human mage, after all. I gotta say, I don't envy you, and I suspect you won't find friends easily because of it. Enemies, however, you'll find those in abundance. I figured as much, but I didn't expect this to be easy. It was never meant to be a cobbled road. Saiyah tilted her head. Kai noticed her questioning gaze. What? Never meant to be a cobbled road? You've said that before, and I'm not familiar with the expression. Is it a common phrase amongst humans? Kai shrugged. It's a common phrase amongst this one. It means life is not supposed to be easy. It's from a poem. It was my mother's favorite. Riley instantly perked up. A poem, you say? Do you still remember it? Well, yeah. Riley flourished his hand while holding a newly filled glass. Well, by all means then, regale us with it. I wish to hear some literary arts from the human realm. Kai paused tentatively, but Saiyah nodded encouragingly. She seemed just as intrigued as Riley. Kai sighed deeply and relented. He had not recited the full stanza since his mother's passing. Hearing it still caused a twinge of sadness, reminding him of her. But Kai took a long drink from the elderberry wine to help with that. There was never meant to be a cobbled road for me, a straight and even path to wander by. The path I take, I've forged my own, through brambles, thickets overgrown, on a trek that few would take but I. And though I stumble, though I fall, every scrape that I recall reminds me of this tangled trail I roam. There was never meant to be a cobbled road for me, but this barely beaten path will lead me home. Saiyah smiled and Riley clapped. Bravo!
That is beautiful, Kai, she replied earnestly. I can see why your mother treasured it.
Kai smiled slightly. And next up for entertainment, we have Saiyah singing us an elven folk song, Riley proclaimed, presenting a hand to Saiyah.
No, we don't,
Saiyah stated matter-of-factly.
And I can tell you for certain, I have not had nearly enough wine to even entertain the idea.
Oh, I can help with that, Riley said, and shot up to refill her glass as Kai laughed. Even Saiyah chuckled, adding,
Careful, Riley, the beast within you is shining through.
To which Riley replied with a devilish grin. Yeah, I was wondering about that. If you're part beast, then what kind of beast are you? Riley smiled slyly at the question. Take a guess, why don't you? He coaxed. Kai thought long and hard for a moment, the color of Riley's eyes being the only real clue he had to go on. Bear? No, definitely not, Riley replied. I know bear shifters, a bunch of dense braggarts, the lot of them. Hawk, then? To be able to soar amongst the clouds, but no. Maybe wolf?
Oh, for goodness sake, he's never going to guess it,
Saiyah interjected.
Just show him, Riley.
Riley smiled, stood up, and bowed. If my audience demands it, who am I to argue? In one swift motion, Riley tossed the robes he was wearing towards Saiyah, who caught them in surprise. To be fair, Kai was a bit surprised as well by a sudden naked Riley standing in the snow. In an instant, though, Riley's body began to twist, and his face contorted. The way his limbs snapped, the sound of crunching bones seemed sickeningly painful from Kai's point of view, but Riley didn't seem bothered in the slightest. As he started to grow, his body erupted in white and gold fur and expanded till he was the size of a full-grown griffin, a creature about 15 feet tall. Ha! Whoa! Kai uttered in disbelief. He stood face to face with a very large, very intimidating, white and gold fox. Unlike the smaller versions, Riley had fangs the size of daggers and claws the size of short swords. Kai had never seen such a creature in his life, nor read about them in any book. It was a marvel to witness. Riley let out a sigh as he shook his head, the gust of wind strong enough to ruffle Kai's hair and clothing. Kai was fairly certain that if the creature before him wished it, he could easily swallow him in one gulp.
He is Lyra Vulin,
Saiyah commented, to Kai's bewildered expression.
Firefox. They were ancient beasts that once roamed Taiga, much like dragons, and much like dragons, they were hunted to extinction by mages due to their magical qualities. Their white and gold fur is fireproof. In fact, it is said they were some of the only beasts that could fight dragons on an equal footing. Unfortunately, they only exist now in the shifters who carry the line. Riley is from a family of old bloods, some of the most honored and powerful shifters in his realm.
Which is a really fancy way of saying self-centered, entitled old pricks. Saiyah and Kai turned to see Riley had transformed back to his human form, with only the large paw prints in the snow around them displaying proof he had actually shifted. Riley bowed slightly, extending his arm to Saiyah. My clothes, dear Saiyah? Unless, of course, you prefer the view? He added with a grin. Saiyah scoffed and threw his robes back at him, none too gently. Riley laughed as he pulled his robes back on. He then grabbed his drink and drained its contents. Now, he proclaimed once the glass was dry, who would like a refill? The trio spent the rest of the night huddled around the campfire, laughing and exchanging stories till the stars began dying out. Kai could not remember having so much fun. Of course, he had never really had friends before either. Close to sunrise, Kai sat on a stump across from Saiyah, leaning in, listening closely and attempting to repeat her words. Mirana, said Kai, trying to mimic her inflection.
Mirana,
Saiyah corrected. Abara, Kai tried as Saiyah chuckled.
Ahbira,
she corrected. Kai chortled. I fear I lack the subtlety for Elvish, Kai stated. Saiyah smiled.
You're doing fine,
she assured him.
It is notoriously difficult to learn a new tongue.
How long did it take you to learn to speak Common? Saiyah shrugged.
A few months at least.
Kai laughed. Well, now I feel so much better. Saiyah chuckled and rolled her eyes.
You cannot compare the two. Trust me, you're making good progress.
Then I yield to your expertise, Kai added with a slight bow as he finished the contents of his glass. Looking up, he saw the pinkish tint on the horizon, meaning sunrise would not be far off. Oh, we've been out all night, Kai noted. His head had started to pound from the mixture of sleep deprivation and the sheer volume of wine the trio had consumed. Saiyah looked to the sunrise and shrugged.
I will bet you Lady Luelle has not returned to her room either. Still, I suppose it would probably be best to head inside before our disappearance is questioned. Do you agree, Riley?
Silence. Kai and Saiyah looked over at Riley to see he was still sitting on the log, but his head was slumped over. Kai and Saiyah walked over to him. Riley? Kai asked as he shook his shoulder. Riley's body tilted and fell off the log, hitting the snow with a muted thud. Kai and Saiyah stood stunned at his perfectly still form laying at their feet. Is he dead? Kai questioned.
If that is all it took to kill a Schiff, this species would have never survived,
Saiyah replied. No sooner had she said this than Riley twitched a bit and groaned.
See? He lives.
What do we do now? Kai questioned.
I suggest we leave him,
Saiyah replied as Kai answered with an uncertain look.
It is said that a Schiff can tolerate extreme cold and heat quite well.
You intend to test that theory?
Well, I certainly don't intend to carry him.
Kai chuckled. I'll make sure he gets back, or indoors at least. Perks of being a traveler. Saiyah clutched at her pocket. She had been carrying something around for a while, and now seemed like as good of a time as any to give it.
Yes, well, on that point, here,
Saiyah replied, handing Kai something from her pocket. Kai inspected the soft-stitched brown leather strap with a single jagged stone wrapped in metal twine on the top of it. A bracelet? Kai questioned.
It is made from a wayfinding stone,
Saiyah replied.
It is one of the many stones from my family collection. Its magical qualities align itself to the earth. It has been used for navigation by travelers for millennia. No matter where you are, no matter what time of day, as long as you wear it, it will improve your sense of direction. I figured you could use it the next time you find yourself lost in the woods.
Kai was speechless. He had never been given a gift and was honored Saiyah had thought of him. But he also felt guilty that the gift was sparked by the lie he had told her when Thaden abducted him. Kai's face fell. Saiyah? Such a family heirloom? I couldn't. Saiyah held up her hand and cut him off.
Before you argue, you should know it is incredibly rude to refuse a gift from an elf. We are very proud creatures and do not hand out gifts often. I feel I should warn you.
Kai smiled. In that case, I certainly don't want to offend. Thank you. Truly.
Yes, well, it is nothing,
Saiyah brushed off.
To my family, these are just stones. They are only of use to mages anyway. Plus, I still carry a shard of the same wayfinding stone as well.
She held up her bracelet so that Kai could see that a much smaller shard of the same stone resided in her charm bracelet.
Though I feel you will get far more use from it than I do.
Kai put the bracelet on his left wrist. Almost instantly, his sense of direction heightened. He immediately knew which way was back to the castle, even though it was completely shrouded by trees. Indeed, Kai agreed. I can already tell it will help me immensely. Kai beamed at her. Saiyah suddenly felt rather transfixed. In all the time that she had known him, she wondered if she had ever truly taken the time to look at his face. Now that she did, she couldn't help but notice that, for a human, he was rather handsome. Saiyah quickly looked to the ground as soon as the thought ran through her mind, feeling the need to flee.
I should head back,
she stated quickly.
Good night, Kai.
Salah Noren, Saiyah. It took Saiyah by surprise to hear Kai say good night in Elvish. She quickly nodded to him as she turned and started heading back to the castle. Behind her, she could hear Kai trying to rouse Riley. Riley? Riley! Riley! Wake up! It's time to head back. Here, I'll help you. Saiyah quietly cursed Riley as she quickened her pace slightly. It was all his fault, after all. It was because she partook in that silly wine that she felt this way. Her head was muddled. She wasn't thinking clearly. That was the only reason her heart was beating so fast. And why she was momentarily mesmerized by a warm voice, a bright smile, and deep blue eyes. Water was falling in heavy droplets, hitting Umbri's face as he quietly followed Amon in the dark. Arden had told Umbri to meet him for final preparations. For that, they were heading down, deep into a cave in Iselia. As Umbri continued closer to where his master waited, he could hear whispering in his mind.
Ugly little goblin. Rip him apart. Paint the floor green. Slice him to bits. Hang him. Bleed him dry.
Umbri could feel the shadows moving all around him, and the voices were getting louder in his head, making it harder to focus. The shadows were getting closer, closing in. Umbri felt the fear rise within him, and he turned in all directions to pinpoint his attackers. Horrible images of his death by dismemberment were being bombarded into his mind along with the voices. He was so engrossed in the shadows, he didn't see Amon stop and almost collided with him. When Umbri stepped around the formidable shifter, he saw the faintest gleam of candlelight in the center of an underground cavern. His master stepped out from the shadows, wielding a long black staff. Arden held the staff up, and the voices around Umbri instantly silenced. Umbri looked around to see a huge cavern filled with ghostly forms, standing like soldiers around them. In the low light, Umbri could only make out some features of the shades. In all his time as maester, he'd only come across one naturally occurring shade. Looking at the hundreds around him now, Umbri shivered. Their skin was gaunt and whitish, covered in splotches of red blood. Their teeth ended in sharpened points, and their haunting words echoed in the recesses of his mind. They took no stake in Umbri. However, as soon as his master stepped forward, all eyes turned to Arden. The necromancer handed Umbri a dark onyx staff with a crimson orb on its head.
I know they can be a bit overwhelming, my friend,
Arden stated.
You can control them with this.
Umbri bowed on one knee as he reached forward and grasped the staff. An immense dark energy flowed into him. As Umbri slowly acclimatized to the power boost, his eyes shone black as coal. He looked up at Arden standing over him.
Thank you for such a gift, my lord.
Arden held his head up, looking down at Umbri with an expression of displeasure.
I don't want your thanks, Umbri. I want my stone. Do not fail to claim it for me.
Umbri nodded.
I swear it, my lord. If it takes tearing through every soul in Iselia, I will make sure you get what you want.